Making decisions can often feel like a lot of work. So each choice we make influences not just our lives, but the lives of people around us. But even though it can seem complicated, figuring out how to make better decisions isn't as mysterious as it seems. It's something we can get better at through awareness, thought, and some practice. So by paying attention to our thought processes and the factors that influence us, we can turn decision making from a source of stress into a powerful way to grow and find true fulfillment. So how can we get better at navigating all these options? Or what strategies can help us make choices that really reflect our values and goals? Let's check out 7 key strategies and ideas that can help you make more intentional and effective decisions. You have to have a strategy going in. So in the book Elevate, Rich Horwath points out that managers need to be smart about their decision making, especially when it comes to setting their strategic direction. Their choices should really help them hit their goals and objectives. So since strategy is all about using limited resources wisely, it's very important to develop solid patterns, not just in how those resources are initially allocated, but also in how they're moved around when needed. So a lot of managers end up stuck with resources tied up in projects that are going nowhere. They just hang on to these dead-end initiatives until the next planning cycle rolls around. This mindset, called the sunk cost effect, means they keep throwing more and more resources at a failing project just because they've already invested time and money into it. This kind of thinking can really hold back overall progress and can have serious consequences, not just for the companies, but for the leaders as well. When strategy is all over the place, it's usually a sign that things aren't being handled well. Leaders who adopt a fly by the seat of their pants approach tend to chase after every opportunity like it's the best thing ever. But often they end up missing the bigger picture because they haven't put together a solid game plan focusing and delivering the best value to the right customers. When it comes to spotting trends in the market and understanding customers and competitors, it's important to keep the bigger picture in mind. One way to find these patterns is by looking at snapshots of the business at different times to see which activities or trends pop up together. You can create a series of contextual radars and then check them out for recurring patterns. So contextual radars gives a quick look at the main points of the business landscape, which are the market, the customers, the competitors, and the company itself. In the middle of this radar are the key issues or activities that reflect what's changing in the business. You can spot trends and patterns. Once you identify these patterns, you can have meaningful discussions and how you should allocate resources accordingly. Moving on to the next technique is you have to know when decisions fail. So in his book, Beating the Global Odds, Paul Laudicina states, it's no surprise that people and organizations are feeling lost and confused these days. With all the crises, the scandals, the endless product choices, and the nonstop flood of news and social media, we don't feel any smarter. So when there's too much information and not enough clarity, we start to latch on to quick bites of certainty and make decisions that seem reasonable in the moment. So what are the most common reactions to information overload and confused perception? So the first one, when people and businesses are up against a complex and ever-changing world, they often end up stuck and take no action. That may not be the best approach to a situation. Freezing and putting things off means you miss out on chances to do something worthwhile and you lose the edge over your competition. Number 2, when faced with a ton of complexity, people and businesses usually start breaking things down and sorting them out to try to understand what's going on and make solid data-backed choices. But often there's a risk of getting too caught up in the tiny details and losing sight of the big picture, which can lead to either doing nothing at all or making moves that don't really get results. So the third reaction is basically what a lot of us do to counteract the second one. We start to overanalyze things, but instead of getting stuck in doing nothing, we end up jumping to one conclusion. We're so confident in our analysis that we see it as something set in stone. So another effective technique is to pause before making a decision. As Kevin Cashman says in his book, The Pause Principle, competencies might get you to the door of leadership, but character is what truly opens that door. So what exactly is character? Well, it's basically our genuine, unfiltered self. So people often either put others on a pedestal or they tear them down, which just pulls us away from working on our true selves. Taking a moment to really see our own character, our own strengths, our own weaknesses is so important for being self-aware and staying true to who we are. So most of us really believe that having good character is very important for solid leadership. And we definitely look for that quality in leaders that we admire and work with. However, Not many leaders take the time to check in on their own character or even work on it. We often expect these qualities from others and want them in our leaders, but we rarely hold ourselves to the same standards. So a CEO of a Fortune 500 company, she shared that taking a pause helped her view decision-making in a whole new light. She realized that slowing down really built her muscle of intention instead of just letting choices and their effects happen randomly. So figuring out whether her leadership comes from her true self or just a way to cope has turned out to be a valuable insight for her. Character is at the heart of what makes a leader. It goes way beyond just what someone does or their accomplishments. It comes from who they truly are. So when we lead from our character, we naturally show qualities like being real, having a purpose, being open, trustworthy, and compassionate. So another technique is to consult with your cabinet. So Bob Frisch points out in his book, Who's in the Room, whether they're used wisely or not, kitchen cabinets play a big role in how we organize things. So the term actually comes from U.S. history, originally used by political opponents of President Andrew Jackson. They used it to mean the informal group of advisors he relied on alongside the official cabinet to make important decisions. So back in the 19th century, kitchens were usually smoke-filled spaces that were kept away from the guests, while the parlor was the nice, the lavish, acceptable part of the home. So nowadays, kitchen cabinet refers to any leader's unofficial circle of top advisors. So most CEOs lean on a close circle of trusted advisors when it comes to making these big decisions. So since the CEO is the one responsible to the board, they can consult with whoever they want to when it comes to making the big calls. So a kitchen cabinet has benefits that most leaders just cannot do without. So number one, it lets the CEO talk with exactly the right group of advisors for a specific decision. So number two, since it's a small, picky group, it avoids the issues of endless debates, different skill levels, and turf wars that often come up in a bigger, more diverse team. The CEO gets that honest feedback and the privacy that only a small, trusted group can offer. So these informal, makeshift groups are very useful, and leaders have been using them for a long time. So it's pretty rare for a leader to toss out their kitchen cabinet, and honestly, they shouldn't. So now this next technique or this strategy is you have to learn to lead the decision-making process. So John Hamm points out in his book, Unusually Excellent, the way we judge our skills as leaders really comes down to the decisions we've made throughout our careers. At its core, leading effectively means guiding the decisions or discussions that help us make better choices. So as a leader, your main role isn't to make all the daily decisions yourself, but to guide your team so they can make better choices than they would on their own. So if you think about it, strategy is all about adapting your plans to handle the ups and the downs of competition and conflict. On the other hand, decision making is how leaders react in real time to the twists, the turns, and surprises that come up during execution. Of course, leaders do make decisions while they're planning, and those can be crucial, but it's really the choices they make under pressure during the heat of the moment that define their careers and shape their legacies. So when you think about the lives of the great leaders you look up to, aren't those big decisions they made in the moment the ones you really admire and remember? That's pretty much what legacy is all about, right? So leading decision making might look easy at first glance, but like many things, it's all about the details. What exactly are we deciding? You have to know when should or must this decision be made. You have to know who decides, and you have to know how will this decision be made. It's clear that figuring out what we're deciding is the first step, but you might be curious why when comes before who or how. The reason is simple. How urgent a decision feels often affects who gets to make it and how that process goes down. So we usually figure out the when pretty quickly when making decisions. If something's really urgent and someone nearby is qualified to handle it, it only makes sense to let them take charge, even if they are not the absolute best choice if we had more time. Now, if we weren't in a rush, we could probably pass it on to someone even more qualified to make that call. The next technique is decide how to decide. So in the book, Crucial Conversations, the authors point out that just because everyone has shared understanding or meaning doesn't mean we're all on the same page about what to do with it. So for instance, when teams or families get together and brainstorm a bunch of ideas, they often struggle to actually put those ideas into action. This usually happens for a couple of reasons. So number one, they're really not sure what to expect when it comes to how decisions will be made. And then number two, they don't really follow through on the decisions they make. So this can be risky. When people shift from just thinking about things to actually doing something, that's when new problems pop up. The two trickiest moments in conversations are usually at the start and at the end. Now, the start is tough because you need to create a sense of safety. Otherwise, things can really fall apart. The end can be tricky because if you're not careful about how you wrap up and clarify what everyone agreed on, you might end with mismatched expectations later on. This can go sideways in a couple of ways. It's important not to confuse talking things through with actually making decisions. Talking is great for gathering all different ideas and perspectives, and everyone should feel free to share what they think. But just because everyone's sharing doesn't mean everyone will be involved in every decision. So to avoid any mixed signals, it's best to keep the conversation separate from the decision-making process. So when it's hard to figure out who's in charge, making decisions can get difficult. If the decision-making power isn't clear, just use your communication skills to help everyone understand. Work together to figure out how to make those decisions. There are four main ways to make decisions: by commanding, consulting, voting, or reaching a consensus. So with the command method, decisions are made without involving others. When it comes to making decisions, it's easy to just call the shots on your own, but don't throw out orders. When you're faced with a tough call, think about which parts can be adjusted. And if you need to give someone an order, take a moment to explain why it's important. With the consult method, input is gathered from the group and then a subset decides. When you're looking to get input from the group, make sure it's genuine. If you've already decided what you want to do, don't waste everyone's time pretending to consult. Just go ahead and announce your decision instead of dragging it out. So with the vote method, an agreed upon percentage swings the decision. So when it comes to voting, just remember that a certain percentage will make the final call. Think about the outcomes and know when it's the right time to cast your vote. Don't just throw in a vote without really considering it. Vote should back up thoughtful discussions, not take their place. Consensus means getting everyone on the same page and backing the final choice. But don't force it for everything, and don't act like everyone ends up with their favorite pick. Decisions should be made based on what really makes sense, not just who brought the idea. If something doesn't pan out, let's all take responsibility for it together. So this final technique is learning how to nudge people in the right direction. So Richard Thaler and Sunstein point out in their book, The Nudge, that markets usually push companies to cater to our weaknesses instead of working on to fix them or lessen the impact. So imagine you're in a situation where a group of people needs to make some decisions really soon. You're the one in charge of how to set up that choice environment, figuring out what nudges to provide and how obvious or subtle they should be. So to create the best setup for making decisions, you need to know what situations usually lead to people making poor choices. Benefits now, cost later situation. So when it comes to making choices, people often run into predictable issues with self-control. So these problems pop up mostly when there's a gap between making a choice and facing the outcome. So on one end of the spectrum, you've got what you would call investment goods. These are things like working out, flossing, dieting good, where we feel the pain right away, but don't see any benefits until later. On the flip side, there are sinful goods, stuff like smoking and drinking and eating too much chocolate sweets. We get to enjoy them right away, but deal with the negative effects down the line. Both types are prime spots for using nudges to help steer decisions. The frequency situation. So tough decisions can get easier with a bit of practice, but in reality, a lot of life's biggest choices don't give us much of a chance to practice it. Most people only pick a college one time. Most people only get a chance to pick the right spouse once. Not many of us gets to try out a bunch of different careers, and saving for retirement is a one-time big deal. So the bigger the decision, the less chance we have to practice making it. That's why we could really benefit from someone giving us a gentle nudge when it comes to those rare, tough choices. So let's talk about the feedback situation. So practice alone doesn't lead to perfection if people don't have good chances to learn. Learning happens best when folks get quick and clear feedback right after trying something. So usually we only hear about the choices we make, not the ones we pass up. So if people don't actively seek out new options, they might miss out on learning about different possibilities. And when feedback isn't effective, a little nudge can really help. So knowing what you like situation. So it can really be tough for people to make the right choices when they struggle to connect their options with how those choices will actually play out in real life. If people can't easily figure out how their decisions will impact their future, then having a ton of options might not be helpful, and they could even feel overwhelmed by having to decide for themselves. That's why sometimes a little nudge in the right direction could really help them make a choice. If you found value in this message, hit the like button, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.